On Mother's Day, my son pressed a key fob into his father-in-law's palm, a brand new $250,000 Bentley gleaming in our driveway, then dropped an $8 torn purse into my lap. The red bow on the hood flashed in the sun as everyone cheered. Phones shot video, champagne clinked, Ashley shouted, "Surprise!" over the sizzle of the grill. I could smell new leather and gasoline mixed with lilacs, while my gift smelled like attic dust. Jason's smile was tight, performative, as Frank wiped tears and hugged him like a hero. I sat there, 66, hands shaking, pretending not to notice the rip yawning along the purse's seam. I turned the bag over and found the Goodwill sticker still tucked inside. $7,999 SS, handwritten in black marker. The zipper caught on a loose thread, and the lining felt gritty, like crumbs of someone else's life. Wow. Thoughtful, I heard myself say, voice thin as a grocery receipt. Laughter rolled across the yard, the kind people save for viral moments, not for mothers. I am Margaret, and my cheeks burned so hot I could feel the heat rise above the scent of barbecue. "Frank, you deserve it, Dad," Jason shouted, thumping his chest, and the crowd whooped louder. Frank stammered, "I don't know what to say," while Ashley angled for the best shot, gold bracelets chiming with each take. A gust lifted the bow's ribbon. It snapped against the windshield, crisp as the slap I swallowed. I tucked the purse under my arm, the rip widening like a grin. This was my celebration, staged around me, without me. If you're wondering how a mother becomes invisible at her own Mother's Day, I'll show you exactly how we got here. The boundaries I ignored, the favors I said yes to, the one moment that made me say no. Stay with me. And if you believe a mother's worth should never be measured by a price tag, subscribe to hear the rest. And stories like mine. The bow kept snapping against the windshield like a metronome, keeping time with my heartbeat. The grill hissed and popped, and the laughter trailed across the lawn in bright, careless ribbons, and I felt the heat of the sun and the eyes and the moment pressing against my skin. I am Margaret, 66, and on the kind of afternoon that smells like lilacs and lighter fluid, my son gave a $250,000 car to his father-in-law and a torn purse from Goodwill to me. Ashley caught her reflection in the Bentley's glossy black flank and smoothed her hair, bracelets chiming. "Angle a little more to the left, babe," she called to Jason, phone held high. "The bow looks weird over the license plate." She barely glanced at me. When she did, it was the skim a person gives a lawn chair. Useful, perhaps, but not worthy of a second thought. Ashley is beautiful and fast, the kind of woman who sweeps a room before she actually enters it, deciding what belongs and what doesn't. Since the day Jason brought her home to my little house in Westerville, she has been deciding. I learned that an accepted person was called by their first name, then a nickname, and a chosen person was invited into a frame. I have been Margs for years, 2 clipped syllables, and often I am cropped out. Frank wiped his eyes like a man in a Heroes commercial and pulled Jason into a thick-armed hug. "You shouldn't have," he said, in a voice that meant he deserved exactly this sort of thing. The first time I met Frank, he clapped my shoulder and called me Marjorie, then began giving Jason advice before he sat down. He's a talker. He's a man who likes the idea of himself, and there is a club of such men. They recognize each other by the cars they drive and the way they start sentences with, "Here's what you need to do." Jason grinned the grin he wears when he's performing happiness. From where I sat at the end of the patio, my paper plate tilted precariously over a patch of hostas, I could see the muscle jump along his jaw. That jump has been there since he was 6, and determined to spell Mississippi without peeking at the cookbook on the counter. I loved that stubbornness then, because I thought it meant he'd survive the world. Now, watching him thump his chest and tell Frank he deserved a Bentley on Mother's Day, I wasn't sure who he thought he needed to survive. I held the red purse in my lap with both hands. The rip along the seam widened like a smile that isn't kind. My thumb found the Goodwill sticker tucked into a corner of lining, handwritten price turning my stomach into a small, hard thing. It smelled of someone else's powder and the attic of a stranger's childhood home. I told myself that maybe he doesn't see me the way he once did, that perhaps I had chosen to be so helpful for so long, that my outlines had blurred. I told myself all the things a mother tells herself when she's trying to excuse the inexcusable. Add up the subtraction and find a positive number. And then I pulled my hand out of the purse, smooth and smiling, because I have always been good at making a room easier for other people. Across the yard, the neighbors who happened to be walking by slowed. Phones appeared. It happened so fast, the way a moment goes public. Ashley undid the top button of her linen blouse, as if the day suddenly demanded more light. "Okay," she said, turning her face toward the sun. "Say something sweet, Jay." He lifted his chin like a student who knows he is being graded. "Frank," he called, all warmth and air. "You've been such a father to me." The sound that came out of the group was the sound of a choir, who practiced only the chorus. Lily's little hands clapped hurriedly, off-beat, her eyes flicking between me, Jason, and the car, as if trying to map the song to the people who should be singing it. She's 4 and sturdy, with Summer already dusting her arms. "Grandma," she whispered when she saw me looking, "is that your new car?" I shook my head. "I got a purse," I said softly, and she smiled like children do when they understand neither price tags nor politics. "It's red," she said, delighted, and I nodded. My days are simple now, for the most part. I wake early, before the light is fully up, make coffee and oatmeal with raisins, then water the porch geraniums while the neighborhood is still quiet. I keep a neat calendar with pen, not on a phone, and write birthdays in looping script. Tuesdays, I volunteer at the library, where the same regulars nod at me like we are all in on a secret. On warm afternoons, I walk to the park and sit on the bench with the plate for fallen leaves, and sometimes I close my eyes and hear the drum line from Jason's high school marching band, our house vibrating that autumn, the living room window rattling when he practiced. The rhythm of those years was homework and spaghetti, a hand on a fevered forehead, notes signed for field trips, folded dollar bills tucked into his lunch, little magic tricks that made $20 last until Friday. Tom died when Jason was 11, and the world slid into me and asked if I could hold it. I did not say yes out loud, but I put up my hand just the same. I worked nights at Riverside Hospital as a unit secretary for 12 years, learning the weight and wobble of every kind of pain that could wheel through those doors. In the daytime, while Jason was at school, I napped for a few hours on the couch with the radio low, then wrote checks in blue ink at the kitchen table with the coffee cans of coins arranged like a guardrail. When soccer fees were due, I pawned my wedding set quietly and told him we were trying something new. Minimalist jewelry. The boy deserved cleats that didn't pinch his toes. Velcro on the old pair had given up like a sigh every practice, and I couldn't bear the sound of it anymore. In those days, Mother's Day was pancakes made with too much baking powder, a paper crown cut from a cereal box, and flowers from the gas station. I can still taste the thin tang of orange juice sipped from a plastic dinosaur cup because we were out of clean glasses. The kitchen was a mess, and I didn't care. My medal was a foil-wrapped circle scribbled, "Best Mom," in green crayon. He placed it over my head so carefully it made me bite the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. We took a picture with the disposable camera I'd bought on sale. In the photo, I am holding a spatula like a trophy, and Jason's cheeks are sticky. The window behind us is streaked with April, and the world looks as if it has just been washed. I think sometimes our children grow around our sacrifices the way trees grow around a fence line, swallowing the wire. You can see the shape of the thing if you look closely, but from a distance it's all bark, and they believe the tree was always like that. I paid for Jason's summer classes at Columbus State when he didn't get into Ohio State the first time. I stayed up late with him while he wrote essays, and even later when he decided he was going to start something of his own instead. The app had a name like Future Weather. Brisk, bright. He talked about investors and rounds in the kitchen where my acacia fruit bowl held a scrim of apples 3 days from soft. Just a little help, he had said, just to get it off the ground. He was 24 and earnest, and the jump in his jaw was back. I thought of the can of coins and all the recipes I had cooked from memory. I thought of the little loan I had finally stopped paying. I looked at his hands, at the fingernails bitten down, and I said yes. It felt like falling in front of him again, arms out, my body his first chance at safety. I co-signed the first loan. I gave him the savings I had tucked into a dull green envelope in the bottom of my dresser, the one labeled "Fix the Porch" with a picture of a blue house doodled in the corner. I sold Tom's old truck for parts, the one Jason learned to drive in, a straight-backed thing we had no use for anymore. The app stumbled, then sprinted, then fell, and then was saved by a chance meeting with one of Frank's golf partners, a man with a fondness for ideas and a boat on Alum Creek. Suddenly, Frank was in the picture, smiling his wide, generous smile, taking Jason to lunch at the club a grown boy dreams of impressing. When Jason brought Ashley home the first time, I made pot roast because it seemed safe. She arrived in winter white, while the driveway was still salt-streaked, kissed my cheek without letting her hair touch me, then opened cabinets looking for serving platters as if she had always lived there. "This can be our practice run for the holidays," she announced, and I nodded, learning the cadence of being included on different terms. Ashley's family celebrates everything like it's a photo shoot. The first Christmas we shared, she changed the place cards twice and moved my gift to the back of the tree because the paper clashed. At their engagement party, she gave a speech about the people who made her who she was, and I clapped hard enough that my palms stung even when our family was not in the paragraphs. For the wedding, when she said she had found the perfect venue, but the deposit was due that day, and her parents' money was tied up for a week, I wrote a check from my IRA because she called me Mom for the first time, and I am not made of rock. "Of course," I said, swallowing the scrape of fear in my throat. Of course. After Lily was born, Ashley posted a photo of herself in a soft robe, a halo of blonde hair around her face, and wrote, "We did it." Jason's hand, strong and careful, was just visible on the edge of the frame, and even in that half-inch I saw my boy and the man he was trying to be. They asked me to come over that first night to hold Lily so they could sleep for an hour, and I sat in the dim nursery and sang the lullabies my own mother sang. I hummed and breathed, a tired metronome, while the baby, 9 pounds and new, laid her little fist on my collarbone. When my song hit the part where the river runs down, the sound caught in my chest and spilled into tears I didn't expect. Love like that surprises you, even the second time around. As much as I wanted to be the kind of grandmother who was always there, who could be called at 3 a.m. and arrive in slippers, I had a job still. I kept working at the hospital because retirements don't plan themselves. And there was always something. The pipe burst, and I paid the plumber because the water was up to the cabinet doors, and the man on the phone wanted a credit card up front. The doctor's bill was more than expected. I put it on my card because Jason's face in the ER looked like a boy pretending not to be scared. The daycare waitlist was long. I adjusted my shifts so I could watch Lily 3 days a week while they found the right place with a wooden play kitchen and a soothing director named Pam. "Don't give her peanut butter," Ashley would say. "Not until she's 2. We're doing baby-led weaning." I read everything, nodded, smear of avocado green on my sleeve, and fed Lily soft pear with a teaspoon I'd heated in a mug of hot water because my mother told me to do so when I was tired, and the baby didn't want to eat. "No sugar," Ashley would remind me. "None." At the first birthday party, the cake was a tasteful tower of white, and while she positioned Lily's hand just so on the frosting for the delicate splash of mess that would look good in black and white, I held the knife and waited. Later, my deviled eggs sat at the end of the table because they weren't on the Pinterest board. Ashley included me like a footnote includes a source. Useful, correct, not part of the story itself. "Could you come over and fold the laundry?" She texted one afternoon. "We're wiped." I said yes. "Could you drop off Lily at ballet next week and pick up her special tights?" "Yes." "Could you stay with her Friday night? We have a work thing." "Yes. Yes. Yes." In my kitchen, I would repeat their requests softly, finding the rhythm, turning them into a list that made sense. Sunday afternoons, I made chicken soup and felt the way onion softens as it becomes sweet, almost without you noticing. The first time I said no, it was raining. A February that had iced everything into a sheen. They were in a hurry and spoke the way people do when they have already made arrangements in their heads. "We found a house," Jason said, excitement making his words quick. "Bigger, better schools, closer to Ash's parents. But the bank wants us to carry over less debt to qualify for the rate we want." He held his phone like a talisman, flipping it over and over. "We need to roll what's left of your loan with mine into the new package. Frank's guy can make it happen, but he wants your house as collateral until the refinancing clears. Just for a month." The kitchen light was on, though it wasn't all the way dark. Lily was under the table tracing the grout lines with her finger, singing quietly about a duck. Ashley leaned on the island, nails perfect. "It would mean everything, Margs," she said, smiling like a photograph. "It would make us so much more competitive. My house is small and tidy. I have outlined the door frames twice with a thin brush so they look new. I had paid my last mortgage payment 2 summers prior and stood in the yard with bare feet when I did it, the grass between my toes like applause. I knew that feeling in my bones the way you know the ache that isn't pain anymore. "I can't," I said, carefully, matching their volume. "I love you, and I can't." The word fell between us and rolled under the stove. Jason's jaw jumped. I knew it would. "It's just for a month," he said, then softer. "You know I wouldn't let anything happen." Ashley's smile melted, and for a moment I saw the little girl she must have been, frustrated by a world that didn't bend when she pushed. "You said my loan would be paid off last year," I said, keeping my hands flat on the counter like anchors. "You said, after the wedding, after the app, after the baby. You're making a chain out of afters, and I can't be another link." I lifted my eyes from the counter and found his. The look he gave me was a man's look, not a boy's. He was calculating how to trust and how to ask and how to forgive all at once. "Frank," he began, and I shook my head gently. "Frank is not your mother," I said, perhaps too plainly, "and this house is all I have without you." The rain tapped the window like a nervous guest. Lily sang the part about the duck who was given bread. For the first time in years, I watched a door swing shut in my son's face that I had not rushed to hold open. That night, I made 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and ate one sitting at the counter and one standing, looking out into the dark. The second tasted like a decision after it has cooled. The edges a little hard, the middle still good. I do not know how that no traveled from the kitchen to their kitchen to Ashley's parents' kitchen, but it moved through the pipes somehow. I think that's how it always happens in families. The house speaks too. The next week, the texts came in a different tone. "We're swamped," Ashley wrote, meaning they would ask me less because asking had become uncomfortable. "Lily is doing so well in her new dance class," she wrote, without asking if I wanted to bring her. Jason called less. The week of Mother's Day, I dropped off a bag of groceries, broth, and the good kind of crackers and the apples Lily will eat only if you start them for her. And no one was home. I left the bag and a note on the counter in my careful hand. "See you Sunday. Love, Mom." Which brings me to this afternoon, the bow and the Bentley and the torn purse. The wind lifted the corners of the paper napkins and moved a lock of hair across my forehead, and I reached up to tuck it behind my ear. Frank's laughter rolled and receded, and I wondered at the tide of it. He stamped his foot lightly on the paver, the way a man does when he is too delighted to stand still. "Wait until we take her out," he shouted to no one in particular, slapping the roof like a horse's haunch. "We'll give her a run." He did not look at me when he said it. Ashley wanted to make sure the speech would have a caveat for her version of fairness. "We also got you something, Margs," she called, fingers fluttering toward my lap, as if she were throwing me a merciful glance. It was not lost on me that she had delivered that line after the cameras were rolling. She is an influencer in her own life, and like all good ones, she knows a B-roll moment when she sees it. I smiled at the purse as if it were shy and needed encouragement. "It's red," I said, and some of the women smiled back with relief, like we had all dressed correctly for an event we were sure we'd overthought. I thought of the years of yes, of how it felt to lift a sleeping child from the car and carry him up the long apartment stairs, his breath warm and damp against my neck, always aware of the weight of keys in my hand, because the lock would stick in cold weather. I thought of the day I had to count a bill twice, my finger marking the corners because I didn't want to think I had misread the number. I thought of the time Lily had a fever, and I put my hand on her back and waited, counting in my head, the way you do not move when something important is balanced on a small, perfect place. On the folding table near the patio, my potato salad looked like something out of time. Ashley had hired a caterer for barbecue. Ribs lacquered with sauce as glossy as nail polish. Sliced brisket fanned in a perfect crescent. Pickled onions in a little ramekin. My salad sat at the far end, in my blue Pyrex bowl with the white snowflakes around the rim, the same bowl I had used for every church potluck of my adult life. "We probably won't need this," Ashley had said when I arrived, smiling with a brightness that felt like a polite hand on my shoulder. "But it's so sweet that you brought it." Later, a teenager I didn't recognize moved the bowl closer to the edge to make room for artisanal cornbread cut into squares, so precise they could have been measured with a ruler. Lily tugged at my skirt. "Grandma, are you sad?" she whispered. Children do not ask the way adults do. They put their hands on your face and they look. I wanted to tell her no, that everything was a misunderstanding, that I had always been fine. But I promised myself when she was born that I would not teach her to be afraid of her own heart. "A little," I said, and her mouth puckered. "I'm okay, though." "If you're sad," she said, trying to be very wise, "you can sit in my fort." She pointed to the corner of the yard where she had draped a blanket between two chairs. "It's quiet." It nearly undid me. A woman I'd met twice put a hand on my arm. "Your son is so generous," she whispered, conspiratorial. Her rings clicked together like tiny wind chimes. I nodded. I did not know how to tell her that generosity is not a car purchased $250,000 at a time. Generosity is a ride home from work after a double shift. A lunch pail packed even when you love the last slice of pie for yourself. A hand that reaches for yours when it should not have to and does it anyway. When Jason finally made his way to me, the party had shifted into that golden place where plates are piled on the edge of cookers and napkins tumble in little dervishes, and everyone seems happy with their decisions. He bent down and kissed the top of my head, his lips warm. "Happy Mother's Day," he said. "Do you like the purse?" I could taste the metal at the back of my throat, the way I do when I'm about to say something I can't take back. "Jason," I said, and it surprised me that my voice was steady. "Do you remember the year you made me a crown out of a cereal box?" He smiled slowly, the way a person does when they are walking toward a house they once lived in but haven't visited in a long time. "I do," he said, the jump in his jaw a little softer. "You wore it to the store." "I did," I said. "It made me feel like a queen." He laughed. "Ashley would never let you leave the house like that," he said. And immediately he winced as if realizing the cruelty in the polish. I pressed my lips together. "No," I said gently. "Probably not." I wanted to shake him by the shoulders and say, "Look at me." I wanted to pull the wire through the bark and show him the fence line. "Do not ask me for proof that I have loved you. The proof is that you mistake me for air." But motherhood is a language learned over decades, and I have always been more fluent in the ways that do not break the person in front of me while admitting he has broken you. "I made your deviled eggs," I said instead. "They're at the end of the table." He nodded, distracted by the sound of Frank calling his name, and I watched him go with the same resignation I have watched boys go their whole lives. In school buses pulling away in a fog, in cars driven too fast, in tuxedos and caps and gowns, all of them certain they are headed somewhere important. After the cake was served, white, almond smooth, Ashley announced a toast. "To all the moms," she started, and then continued with care, making sure to name her own mother first, her grandmother in Boca, a friend who had just had twins. "And to Frank," she added, laughing, "who always knows how to make a day special." The crowd lifted glasses like a field of flowers bending toward light. Someone handed me a flute, and I held it without drinking. The champagne bubbled like a song I didn't know the words to. This is how you become invisible at your own Mother's Day. You make yourself a wall for other people to lean on and then notice, one afternoon, that no one asks if your back is tired. You stop marking the hours you give because the person you love is made of them, and then you blink, and he belongs to another house with other rules where the arithmetic adds up differently. You say yes until the word seems like your favorite kind of kindness. You practice being pleasant, as if it were an instrument. And you learn, the hardest way, that the smartest thing you can teach a child is not how to be soft against the world, but how to be soft against you. I sat there, 66, with a purse in my lap and a parade of good manners marching across the grass. The wind picked up, and a few napkins tumbled into my lap like surrender flags. I stacked them neatly and smoothed the edges. Small order in a day gone wide. The afternoon light climbed slowly up the fence, and the shadows of the lilacs reached across the pavement, and I thought of my mother. She had the same hands as me, blunt where other women's were fine. She wore lotion you could buy at the drugstore and always put it on at night, the smell of it lingering on the quilt. When my father died, she did not cry at the funeral. Later, a week later, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed with a dish of buttons on her lap. "I don't know which ones go where," she said, and the buttons were round and unhelpful. I sat with her and we put them in difficulty order. Shiny, rough, ones with 4 holes, the ones that still smelled faintly of a coat collar. "Sometimes there isn't a right place to put things," she said. "Sometimes you just put them all in a tin and carry them around a while. I have a tin like that. It is robin's egg blue, with a dent in the lid, and it used to hold peppermint bark at Christmas. Now it holds things I carry when I am not sure where to put them yet. Jason's first drawing of a house, lopsided and blue. A receipt from the first month I paid the mortgage alone. Tom's favorite tie, faded, a small screwdriver, Lily's birth announcement with her footprint like a leaf. There is also a folded piece of paper with a list of numbers on it. The amount I lent them for the venue, the amount I co-signed, the plumber, the ER copay. I wrote the numbers because numbers are not good or bad. They just insist on being themselves. 2 afternoons ago, I took the tin out and added a new piece of paper. It said, "Boundaries. I do not believe in confrontations for sport. I do not like scenes. I prefer the quiet work of changing a routine so that the life inside it is changed too. But there are days you must say something out loud so everyone hears it, including you." Watching Frank drive his hands along the curve of his new car, watching Ashley orchestrate an angle and shine, watching Jason rewrite the story of who had fathered him, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, something like a final draft. When the sun had shifted just enough that the shadows were kind, I stood. My knees protested, and I made a little joke to Lily about creaky doors. She laughed and put her little hand in mine. "Come see my fort," she said. We climbed into the shade between the chairs and the blanket draped low enough that the world immediately became manageable. Edges soft, sounds far away. Inside the fort, the grass poked my knees, and I smelled clover and sugar and the faint whiff of barbecue smoke that had sneaked under. The light through the blanket was green, and for a second I pretended we were in a forest and could stay there as long as we wanted. "Do you think the Bentley has a name?" Lily asked. "If it was a pony, I would call it Sparkle." I smiled. "I think Sparkle is busy tonight," I said, and she giggled, delighted. "Grandma," she said, lowering her voice, "do you think my mom will let me eat your deviled eggs if we hide in here?" I considered the diplomacy of that question and how 4-year-olds are already learning to speak several languages at once. "I think if we're very careful," I said, "and we use 2 napkins, we can have a snack in our secret fort." We ate one each, little halves hidden in cupped palms, the mustard sharp and familiar on my tongue. When we were finished, I licked my finger and pressed it lightly against a stray bit of paprika on her lip. She beamed, conspiratorial. "Don't tell," she said, and I touched her nose. Crossed my heart. We crawled out, blinking at the brightness. The party had softened. People stood in little clusters with paper plates folded in half like fortunes. The bow had finally come loose and lay wilting on the hood, no one sure where to put it. Ashley gathered empty cups into a neat stack by the drinks cooler and called to Jason without looking up. It was time for the next thing. I walked to my purse, not the red one, and slipped my hand inside. The tin was there, taking up most of the space, cool against my fingers. I held it a second. I would not dump it on the table, counting out coins of memory like a magician, asking for applause. I would not make this day uglier than it had to be by pulling all the wire at once. But I would not go home and quietly place this afternoon into the tin either, pretending it was, like the others, meant to be carried in silence. There are lines you draw, not because you want to keep people out, but because you want to know where you end. "Jason," I called, and my voice traveled cleaner than I expected. That old unit secretary clarity, the kind that could cut through the din of a hospital corridor and reach the person who needed to hear it. He turned, surprise crossing his face as if he had forgotten I could be loud. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I asked. He glanced toward Ashley, toward Frank, toward the circle that had buoyed him all afternoon, then back to me. The jump in his jaw flickered and settled. "Sure," he said, and we stepped a few feet away by the side gate where the fence creaked and the hydrangea was beginning to show its green fists. He stood with his hands on his hips, the way his father used to when he was about to fix something. I wished, for one long second, that the past and the present could fit in the same room without knocking over the furniture. "I won't take long," I said. "I know you're busy." "Mom," he said, and the words softened like bread in warm milk. "If this is about It's about a lot of things," I said gently. "It's about how you talk about family. It's about what you think generosity looks like. It's about how I have acted in a way that taught you to think I don't need anything, and how that is my fault in part." His face changed, pinched, and then softened in the way a man's face softens when he does not feel attacked. The years of us settled around us like dust in a shaft of light. "I know Frank helped you," I continued. "I know Ashley brings things to your life that are shiny and exciting, and that she wants you to chase the version of yourself that looks good on paper." I took a breath. "But I am not paper." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Mom," he said. "The purse." I held up my hand. "The purse is silly," I said. "It's unkind, and it stung, but it's silly. I will not measure my worth in leather and thread. This is about patterns. I have been the person you call to solve the problem quietly. That has been my gift, and my mistake." I reached into my bag and closed my fingers around the tin again, not to brandish it, but to steady myself. I said no to putting my house up as collateral, because I finally learned I have a right to sit someplace and not be asked to move. That no stands. This is a different boundary. He nodded because he didn't know what else to do. "I love you," I said, "because there is no point building a fence if you don't post a sign that says love. But if you want my help, if you want me in Lily's life the way I want to be, if you want me at your table, then you have to stop making me a prop in your play for other people. You have to look at me in rooms like this one." I gestured to the yard, the people, the bow, the car that would always have this day in its history, even if it was washed 100 times. He glanced toward the group again. Frank was telling a story with his hands, and the men were leaning in, laughing. Ashley had bent to fix a strap on her sandal and was saying something to a woman in a voice like the clink of ice in a glass. "This is not a good time," he said, his eyes apologizing for his mouth. "I know," I said. "So I will be brief. Tomorrow, I will call the bank and arrange to have my name taken off any accounts connected to your business that are not legally necessary. I will set up a college fund for Lily in a trust that does not depend on you to access it. And I will not be available to watch Lily on days you call at the last minute unless there is a true emergency. I will still make deviled eggs and go to dance recitals and sit in forts. But I will not come running so you can wave to someone else from a moving car." There it was, the line, neat and clear. He exhaled like someone had taken a heavy box out of his hands. "Mom," he said, his voice somewhere between pleading and incredulous. "Are you mad?" "I'm tired," I said, "and I am a person." I smiled then, so he would know this was not a punishment but a rebalancing. "You can come to my house tomorrow after work. I'll make chicken soup. We can talk then, when there aren't strangers filming your life for you." He looked at me the way he did when he was small, and had lost track of me in a store, and then found me again, a little angry, because finding means you were lost. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay." We stood there for a beat under the hydrangea, the leaf shadows flickering across his face. He touched my arm, a small, grateful pat. "I'm sorry about the purse," he said. And then, because he is my son and knows me like he knows which floorboards in my house squeak, he added, "Even if you say it's silly." I nodded, the relief moving through me so quickly it made my eyes sting. "Bring it over tomorrow," I said. "Maybe I can fix it." He looked startled and then smiled. The first real one of the day, the one that made his eyes tilt the way they had when he was 6 with the spelling bee in the gym. By the time I gathered my things, the shadow of the house had fallen across the lawn, and the mosquitoes had woken, tentative. I tucked the red purse under my arm, because I am not a person who leaves messes for others to clean up. Lily ran up, her cheeks pink. "Can you come see my cartwheel?" she asked, already beginning to tilt. "Tomorrow," I said. "You can do it in my yard." She frowned a little, and then nodded, mollified by the idea of audience. Ashley came over then, placing a cool hand on my elbow. "Leaving so soon, Margs?" Her voice was easy, practiced. "Yes," I said, matching her ease. "I'm going home to take a bath and put on my pajamas and watch that show where they fix old houses." I smiled. "You know me," she laughed, missing the point. "You? You're so old school." She leaned in as if to hug me, and then thought better of it because she was holding a plate. "We'll pick Lily up after your Tuesday shift this week, okay? If you're free." It was not quite a question. It never had been. "Not this Tuesday," I said, and my voice felt like a new sweater, soft but unfamiliar. "But thank you for asking. Another day." Ashley's mouth opened and closed, and then she recovered, turning away before she had to recalibrate. "Of course," she sang. "Of course." I walked to my car. My car old enough to have a CD slot and a passenger seat that stuck if you didn't lean on it just right. I opened the door and slid in. The familiar rip of the seat seam welcoming me like a tiny, loyal dog. I placed the red purse on the passenger seat and my tin beside it, then sat with my hands on the wheel and breathed. The house in the rearview mirror shone with the version of our life Ashley had chosen for it, and for once, I did not look at it with longing. I put the car in drive, backed slowly down the street so as not to run over the chalk drawing of a flower that a child had made at the end of the driveway, and headed home, the windows open to let in the smell of cut grass and something like rain. When I reached my porch, I took off my shoes and left them neatly by the door, as I always do. Inside, I set the tin on the kitchen table and the red purse beside it. The house sighed the way a house does when it is relieved to have you back. I put water on for tea like my mother did when she didn't need tea, but needed the time it takes to boil. While it heated, I pulled a needle and red thread from my sewing box and sat down with the purse in my lap. I turned it toward the light, found the edge of the rip, and slipped the needle through. The thread slid obediently, bright against the dull. My hands knew what to do. I pulled and steadied, thinking with every stitch that repair is its own language, that you can love something and also insist it be stronger next time. I did not know exactly what the next weeks would look like, only that they would look different. I would call the bank. I would call a lawyer, not because I wanted to argue, but because I wanted to understand. I would plant zinnias in the front bed, because they were Tom's favorite, and because they are impossible to discourage once they decide to grow. I would put a Tuesday in my calendar for being no one's emergency plan. I would pick up Lily for our cartwheel lesson on Thursday, and teach her that if you put your hands down with conviction, the rest of you will follow. Out the window, the last of the light made the neighbor's birch tree look as if it were in motion. At the hospital, in the dead of night, when the machines beeped and the world was reduced to numbers and nurses' shoes, I used to tell the patients who couldn't sleep what my mother told me. Some things don't have a place yet. They live in the tin until you know. A boundary, I realized as I tied off the last stitch, is not a wall. It is a path that keeps you from getting lost. I set the purse on the table and looked at it. The rip was a thin, neat scar now. Visible, yes, but sturdy. It would hold for as long as it held. Above me, the house creaked once, twice, settling into itself. I got up and turned off the kitchen light, then turned it back on. I wrote on a scrap of paper and placed it in the tin with calm hands. Tomorrow, soup. After, a conversation. Under that, I wrote a line I had not let myself write yet. I deserve a kinder version of my life. The kettle whistled, and I poured the water. Watched it make tiny storms in the mug. On the counter, my phone buzzed. A photo from Jason, the first for me in days. Lily, mid-cartwheel, hands planted, feet a blur. Ashley's living room a stripe of beige. Under it, a message. She wants to show you. Also, I'm sorry. See you tomorrow, Mom. I set the phone down gently and took a sip of tea. The house held its breath for me, then exhaled. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a screen door shut. A dog barked. A child called for someone to watch. I stood with my palms flat on the cool counter, feeling for a moment the old ache and the new strength together, like two chords. It didn't matter that no one could see it. It was there. And tomorrow, when my son sat at my table with a bowl of soup and the tin between us, when I told him calmly what I meant and what I would no longer do, the outline of me would stay firm in the room. The next days would have a fight, perhaps, or the quieter discomfort that lasts longer than shouting. There would be phone calls with Frank that I wouldn't take, and messages from Ashley asking, "Am I mad?" A word she uses like a mirror. There would be Lily's bright face like a small sun, and my zinnias coming up brave as flags, and the clatter of my spoon against the pot in the evening. My life, I knew, would not turn on the drama of a bow and a Bentley. My life would turn on the steady stitching of a seam and the gentle courage to say no when the world expected yes. That courage had a place now. It would live not in a tin, but in the center of the room. The next morning, the house felt like it had slipped back onto its foundation. Light came in clean along the edge of the kitchen sink, and for a minute, I could pretend yesterday had been a strange weather pattern that passed in the night. I set carrots and celery on the cutting board for the soup, and turned on Wasu for the soft voices. The knife thumped through the carrots, steady as the second hand. I pulled the Robin's egg blue tin to me, let my thumb find the dent in the lid like it has so many times. I added one more slip of paper before the broth boiled. Bank at 9. Attorney at 2. The pen bled a little where I pressed down. Lily's photo, the one with her footprint like a small oak leaf, peeked out from under Tom's tie, and I pressed it back gently. Not yet. Jason texted just after 8. We're on for tonight? His messages always arrive like a boy knocked politely on a door he isn't sure is his. I sent back a thumbs up, then wrote, soup at 6. I pictured his jaw easing when he read it and felt my chest loosen a notch. At the bank, the man in a navy blazer had a Buckeye pin on his lapel, and it made me like him a little more than I might have otherwise. He spoke in words that tried to be kind about things that were not. Cosigner, exposure, liability. We can remove you from this line, he said, tapping one packet, but not this one, unless the primary requalifies on his own. He looked up like a good teacher asking for eye contact. I held his gaze and nodded. I signed what I could. For the accounts that clung stubbornly, he suggested a conversation with a lawyer, even if only to understand your posture. Posture, I repeated, amused. My mother would approve. She used to tap my back between my shoulder blades with 2 fingers and say, "People take you at the angle you present." He smiled without quite understanding. At the legal aid office in a building I hadn't been inside since the city still smelled like snow, a young woman with a neat bun and a voice like a practical lamp read through my stack. "We can't unbake the cake," she said gently, "but we can make sure no one asks you for your house in order to ice it." I laughed, surprised by it. We set up a trust for Lily together that afternoon, a thing that sounded too fancy for my life and then, as the woman explained it, became just another way to be a grandmother in a world that asks you to be savvy. Walking out into sun that smelled like warm tar, I felt taller than I expected. My reflection in the glass showed a woman who knows how to get to the bus stop and where to stand, so the door opens right in front of her. I went to Kroger and bought a fresh loaf of Italian bread and a wedge of Parmesan, and the kind of butter with sea salt crystals. On the way home, I stopped by the library to drop off a book, and Mrs. Emery from the circulation desk reached over the cart and took my hand. "You look like someone who decided something," she said, and I squeezed back, surprised that I wanted to cry. At home, I put the tin and the red purse side by side in the middle of the table, like two students in a class learning the same lesson. Jason came at 6:10, contrite and hungry in that order. He stood in my doorway a beat longer than usual, as if he were waiting for permission to enter a room he has always known. The smell of soup filled the house, the kind of smell that says someone thought about you 2 hours before you arrived. He bent to take off his shoes automatically, and then glanced up into my face to make sure he hadn't forgotten some new rule I hadn't told him. "I made the good bread," I said, and watched his shoulders drop. He moved into the kitchen, like the old choreography still fit. We didn't talk about the car. We didn't talk about the purse. We talked about Lily's attempt to say spaghetti that always comes out biscotti, and how she insists on sleeping with one sock on and one sock off. We talked about the grass. His needs mowing. Mine is behaving with dignity. We talked about how the Buckeyes' spring game had been promising, and he laughed when I tried to sound as if I knew more than I did. When the bowls were empty and the kitchen had that quiet after you've fed someone you love, I slid the tin toward us. He looked at it like it might speak. "Mom," he said, "I don't want this to be..." "It's not an invoice," I said, and he flinched, which told me that is exactly what he had been bracing for. It's a record, for me, because when I write things down, they stop rustling around in my head. I opened it and let him see the slips. He picked up Tom's tie and let it fall back in. He looked at Lily's footprint for longer than I expected. He did not touch the piece labeled boundaries. I was grateful to him for that. "I talked to the bank," I said. "I talked to a lawyer. I set up something for Lily that doesn't depend on anyone's good mood." He nodded, listening like a student at the front of the class. The boy who once cut out a crown from a cereal box looked back at me over the man's face, and I reached for his hand before I could think better of it. "I am not mad," I said. "I am not keeping score to hurt you. I am saying out loud the places where I end and where I begin. Because if I don't, I disappear. And I don't want that to be the story we tell about us." He looked down at our hands. "Ashley says you don't like her," he murmured, the words like stones he was tired of carrying. "She says you're always judging." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for a decade. "I am trying not to judge," I said carefully. "I am trying to understand her. She is a different kind of person than me. She likes to arrange things and have the light hit right, and I like to hand someone a napkin before they realize they needed it." I reached up and smoothed a stubborn piece of hair that always sticks up at the back of his head. It lay down like a dog that knows its name. But I cannot live inside a photograph. I need rooms with chairs where you can sit down. He laughed quietly at that. And in the laugh, I heard the boy who once asked if he could sleep in my bed because the thunder had names. He put his forehead on the edge of my hand, like he used to when he was smaller, embarrassed by a feeling and needing it anyway. "I'm sorry," he said into my skin. "I keep thinking I'm doing a good job at being a man because I can get shiny things to appear. I don't know why that feels like such an accomplishment." "Because we tell our boys it is," I said soft. "We hand them commercials and pat them on the back. We don't always ask them to sit with someone quietly and make soup." He stayed until 10, talking in circles that were actually spirals, making a new shape of us. When he left, he kissed my cheek the way he did when he was 13, and too tall for his own limbs. And he took the mended red purse with him because I asked him to. "Bring it back when you can," I said. "It doesn't belong in your house any more than the crown would have." He laughed and promised. 2 days later, while I was reshelving biographies at the library, a young man I didn't know spoke into his phone near the travel section. "Did you see it?" he said, and then laughed a laugh that was not unkind, but was not kind either. "The Mother's Day Bentley? Classic." He scrolled, and the blue light made his face look briefly ghostly. She called it vintage. He held the phone up to a friend who had materialized, and I knew without seeing it that he was talking about Ashley's post. The one with the bow on the hood and the caption, "When your man celebrates the people who helped him become who he is. Swipe to see my Mills gift. She loves thrift. Blessed, now family, grateful." Blessed and grateful are not the wrong words. but sometimes we use them like wipers. A quick swipe across a mess that still requires hands. I went home through Goodale Park so I could watch the dogs in the fountain for a while. I sat on a bench and listened to the splash and the laughter and the far-off thud of a basketball on a court I couldn't see, a sound that always makes me think of boys trying not to cry and succeeding. On my phone, Ashley's post waited. I looked. I was not tagged, which was both a mercy and a small injury. The comments bloomed like hydrangeas. He's the best. What a son. Frank, you deserve it. Aw, your MIL is so cute. We love a thrift queen. I clicked away because I don't need to eat things that aren't food. On Friday, they texted asking if I could come over Saturday morning, just for a couple of hours, so they could take some content photos with the car. Frank wants to get a shot with the grill and the sun, Ashley wrote, as if the sun were something you could book. We'll be back by lunch. I stared at the laugh line on my knuckle where the skin creases when I hold a pen and typed, I can do 10 to 12. Jason liked the message as if liking were a thank you. When I arrived at their house in New Albany, the air smelled faintly of new mulch and something lemony. Ashley opened the door in a denim dress with big brass buttons and kissed the air near my cheek. We'll be quick, she said, God willing and the light holds. She handed Lily to me like an exchange rate. No sugar, she murmured. She gets wild. I nodded, and Lily looped her arms around my neck, her breath on my ear like punctuation. We went to the backyard. The swing set shone with newness. The slide still a little too slick at the bottom so that it surprised you gently when you landed. Grandma, Lily whispered, conspiratorial. Mommy says the car purrs. I smiled into her hair. I bet it does, I said. Do you purr? She shook her head vigorously. I roar, she said, and then roared very softly so she wouldn't get in trouble. We played a game where the patio stones were islands, and we were wary explorers who could only cross if we said a password. Her passwords were the names of all the people she had ever loved, in order, and sometimes mine was twice in a row. When the 2 hours were nearly done and the sun had moved a fraction, I went inside to use the bathroom and stopped by the kitchen island because a note was taped there in Ashley's neat hand. Baby's schedule for Margs, Saturday. It had bullet points and underlines and a final line in red. Absolutely no peanut butter. I left the note as it was. I do not need instructions to love a child. But I stood at the sink after I washed my hands and looked at my face in the window and saw a woman who has followed instructions most of her life and decided that when the instructions are correct and kind, she will still sometimes choose to read the map herself. At 12:05 they weren't back, and at 12:45 Ashley texted, almost done, traffic was a nightmare. Jason texted, you good? Twice. I sent back, yes. Lily ate lunch, no peanuts. We read 2 books. She is on the couch telling me a story about a squirrel. At 1:30, Ashley's mother arrived with coffee and a box of something in a white paper bag. You are a saint, she sang when she saw me. She swept into the kitchen with the easy certainty of a woman who has never had to check a bank balance before opening an app. I told them to tip you like they would a nanny, she added brightly. This is what? Your Saturday? She set a gift card on the counter, Target, $50, and pursed her lips into a kiss for the air. From us. She winked. I'm her grandmother, I said, and smiled so she couldn't tell me I sounded small. I'm not a nanny. Her face changed, and then rearranged swiftly. Of course, she said. Your family. The words, like her lipstick, were applied correctly. The 2 hours became 4, and I learned something about myself that afternoon. My patience is a muscle that shakes when you ask it to hold too long. When they came back at 2:08, sun-pleased and breathless, they were full of apology that had the feel of a habit rather than a plan to change. Jason kissed Lily's head and said, Thanks, Mom. You're the best. In the tone that says a good thing happened to me, and I didn't have to think about how it did. I drove home with the Target card in my purse, the red one I had mended, the seam neat and strong under my palm. At a 4-way stop, I pressed my thumb into the place where the Goodwill sticker had once lived and made a decision I had not been planning to make. I pulled into the Target parking lot and walked in, the fluorescent lights flattening everything, and headed to customer service. "I'd like to put this back on the card it came from," I said, and slid the gift card across the counter. The young woman looked surprised and then relieved to have a puzzle she could solve. "I can do that," she said. "What's the reason?" I looked at her name tag, Alyssa, and thought about how many times a day she must have to choose what to think about strangers. "I don't want to be paid," I said, and she nodded because that, apparently, was reason enough. Back home, I added a new slip to the tin. Saturday, 4 hours, gift card. I wrote, "Returned," not in anger, for clarity. The tin didn't get heavier. I did not feel noble or wronged. I felt like a woman who had decided the drawer where the measuring cups go is finally the right one. The next week brought little things that add up in exactly the way bills do. Ashley organized a family group thread called Team Lily, and I was not added. I found out because Lily told me they had sent pictures of the duck pond at Easton Town Center, and when I asked Jason to send me one, he said he thought I would rather not be overwhelmed by notifications. "I like to be overwhelmed by my granddaughter," I said, and he said he'd fix it, and then he didn't for 3 days. Frank called me for the first time ever, an odd courtesy that felt like a hat placed carefully on my head so I wouldn't see what hair it was flattening. "We should talk investments," he said, and I said, "We should talk gratitude," and he chuckled as if I had made a cute joke. Lily had a dance recital at the community center in Westerville on a Saturday when the air felt like bottled water. I pinned on a little brooch shaped like a lily because I am that kind of grandmother, and I put the red purse over my shoulder like a sash that meant something. The lobby was a swirl of little girls in tulle and mothers clutching bobby pins and dads looking delighted and confused. I found my seat halfway back and across, the place where you can see the stage and the people you love. Ashley's parents were in the front row, their posture flawless. Ashley moved like a stage manager, her hair perfect even in the chaotic light. She saw me and raised her eyebrows as if to say, "There you are," and then moved on, because she had already placed me on her mental seating chart. Jason came over and sat beside me for 2 minutes, his thigh bouncing, and then was called away to carry a water bottle to the second row. A woman behind me said softly, "Which one is yours?" And I smiled and said, "The sturdy one who looks like she knows where her snack is." When the curtain went up, Lily found me in the crowd like a bird finds its flock. She smiled so fiercely her eyebrows tried to climb off her face, and I felt something warm and enormous flood me. The song was a low, cheerful thing, and the children waved their arms like seaweed. Lily's ponytail bounced with conviction, and at the end she turned to our side and bowed as if she had been performing just for our row. After, the hallway flowed with congratulations. 3 generations! Ashley trilled to a photographer she'd hired for the event. She pulled her mother close on one side and then waved at me to come down from my row. "Hurry, Margs," she called. "We've only got the space for 2 more minutes." Noise rolled over us like soft thunder. I walked to the end of the row and paused. I looked at the red purse on my shoulder, at the seam that would hold if I did not pull it past what it was meant to carry. I understood something in that second. There is a way to be in a picture and not consent to its story. "I'll sit this one out," I said, and my voice was light, almost cheerful. "Get a good one with your mom." Ashley blinked, her smile dimming just a watt. "You sure?" she asked, and the photographer looked at the clock. "I'm sure," I said, and stepped back. Jason looked between us, confusion and a small panic flitting across his face. He started toward me and I shook my head a fraction. He stayed where he was. I took Lily's hand when she wriggled free and knelt so we were level. "You were brave," I said. "You remembered to smile with your eyes." She blinked solemnly and then broke into a grin, because of course she does not yet know how to hold one kind of discipline at a time. "Grandma, can we get ice cream?" she asked. "Daddy says there's a place with sprinkles." I glanced at Ashley, who was already corralling her parents toward the photographer for another angle. Jason nodded without looking at me, a reflex. I pulled my keys from my purse and held them anyway. Metal witness. "Ask your mama," I said, and Lily did. And Ashley, distracted, said, "Fine, but only," and then trailed off, already in a different sentence. Outside, I left them to their pictures. I sat on a low wall by the parking lot and let the sun find my face. The cars blinked their winks. The breeze smelled like someone's sunscreen, and the faint, sweet stink of the dumpster too near the door. I took the tin from my purse and rubbed its dent with my thumb until the metal warmed. I did not cry, which surprised me. I felt like a person who had stepped out of a moving walkway and was standing, steady, on the ground. The picture Ashley posted later didn't include me. The caption was a volley of gratitude. Her mother, the studio, the teacher, the village. I watched the likes rack up with the detached interest of someone watching rain in another town. Then, an hour later, she posted a second shot. Lily midair, legs pointed like exclamation marks. In that one, in the background, barely visible, was the red strap of my purse, a slash of color near the edge of the frame where the audience ends. I laughed out loud, a small, tidy sound, and put my phone face down on the couch. The next day, I emptied my key ring onto the kitchen table. There were more keys than I remembered. One for my house, one for the shed, one for my neighbor's when she is in Florida, and I water her ferns, one for Jason's house, one for Ashley's parents' back gate for the time we watched their little Scotty, and it seemed like I would always be the person with keys to other people's lives. I picked up the key to Jason and Ashley's and turned it over. The metal was warm from my hand. I thought of all the times I had let myself in. Arms full of soup, an extra blanket, a bag of groceries. All the times I had turned it and entered a room where I was welcome but not seen. I put that key and the spare garage remote in an envelope and wrote their address in my careful hand. I did not write a note inside. The envelope was the note. I did not leave the group thread when Jason finally added me to it, because I did not want to make a gesture that would only confuse. I did mute it, which I suspect is a very modern form of boundary my mother would nothing about but would approve. I set Tuesdays aside in my calendar with a firm line. Soup night. I bought zinnia seeds and a new trowel at Oakland Nursery and planted too many on purpose. I watched the news and turned it off. I went to Riverside for the volunteer luncheon and sat with women who know how to laugh at the exact right volume for a hospital. Then came Lily's 5th birthday party. Ashley reserved a shelter at the park near Hoover Reservoir and hired a woman dressed like a fairy to paint stars on small faces. There were banners with her name and a cake that looked like a castle, and food from a place that catered sliders so perfect you felt like a giant holding them. The Evite had arrived with the note, "Please no gifts. Your presence is the present." Then a PS. "If you insist, we're doing a $5.29 for her future." A QR code blinked politely in the corner. I saw myself, briefly, as Ashley must see me. A woman who brings the wrong kind of salad, who uses cash when everyone else uses a code, who wears a blouse and a brooch to a party where the dress code is whimsical created for the grid. I tucked the trust paperwork I had set up for Lily into the red purse, along with a simple card. "For your big, brave life. Love, Grandma." I brought the deviled eggs anyway, because I knew at least 3 people would be relieved to see them. At the park, wind moved the lake in small, faithful waves. The fairy's wings glittered, and Lily's hair sparkled lightly with something that would take 3 washes to remove. The party had a schedule, printed on sliding boards of cardstock at each picnic table. I found my name at the end in small italic, thanks to Margs for the deviled eggs. The exclamation point looked like a courtesy. While children roared and giggled and adults hovered, Ashley made a speech with her glass, held with the kind of care that says both. "Look how casual I am, and also this glass is very thin." "To my girl," she said, "whose light teaches me every day." She thanked her parents for the castle cake. She thanked the fairy for showing up when the original couldn't. She thanked the caterer, the weather, the city of Westerville for the shelter. She glanced at me and said, "And to everyone who helps, you know who you are." The crowd cheered and Lily covered her ears happily at the noise. When it was time for presents, because even with a QR code and an instruction, presents arrive, Ashley directed traffic like a conductor. "This one is from Aunt Danny," she said, lifting a soft package. "This one is from Grandma Elaine." The gifts were perfect and appropriate, and Lily reacted as earnest children do, loving each thing with her whole face, then forgetting it instantly when the next thing appeared. I waited until the table was clearing to take the red purse, mended seam and all, and set the card on top. "This is from me," I said to Lily, and the ferry and the sliders and the lake and Ashley's plans faded a little because Lily looked, truly looked, and reached for it with both hands. She opened the card and pressed her palm to the paper where I had written my message. "My big brave life," she whispered, trying it out. I knelt beside her, my knees complaining, and said, "That's yours." I placed the envelope with the trust information into Ashley's hands because that is the line the law draws, and then, in front of whoever was watching because it seemed time to tuck public and private into the same pocket, I took the spare house key and the garage remote from my purse and put them on the table. "How will you get in?" Jason asked, his voice too loud for the space, the fear in it making his cheeks flush. "I'll knock," I said, and smiled, so that the kindness of the thing was clear. "And you'll open the door. Or you won't, but not because I can open it for you." Ashley looked at the key and then at me, calculation and something like respect crossing her face and fighting briefly. "Mom," Jason said, and his mouth opened like it had before at the dance recital, with words that couldn't decide if they were an apology or a defense. I touched his arm and shook my head. This was not a debate section. This was a new vocabulary word we were all learning how to say. "Could we get a picture?" the fairy asked cheerfully, unaware. 3 generations? She raised her sparkly phone and smiled, ready for her tip. The wind lifted the corner of the tablecloth, and someone laughed, and Lily shouted something about the lake, and for a moment the world was the kind of loud that makes you want to close your eyes. I took Lily's hand. "You and me," I said to her, "by the water. If your mom says it's okay." Ashley, to her credit, took a breath and then nodded. "Go ahead," she said. "Watch the mud." That was our truce, brief and real. We walked down to the shore where the rocks were warm. Lily crouched and threw a small stone with both hands, her tongue sticking out in concentration. "Make a wish," I said, "because I am greedy for traditions and will invent them if I need to." "What for?" she asked. "For courage," I said. "You have enough," I added, "but it's always nice to have a pocket extra." She nodded as if I had given her something heavy and valuable, and she cocked her arm and tossed another rock into the glitter. When we went back up, people were moving toward cars, sunlight following them like a polite tail. Ashley was talking to her mother. Jason was pretending not to be looking for me. I placed the red purse on the picnic table for a second and slipped my hand into the tin inside it, just to feel the cool slick of the slips, the steadiness of the record I had made when the world insisted on being vague. I took out the piece that said boundaries and refolded it because the fold had gone soft at the edges. I put it back, the tin clicking shut with that small sound of something right-sized. "Where are you going?" Jason asked as I moved toward the path. "Home," I said. "I'm going to put on my pajamas and watch that show where they fix old houses and drink tea that I will forget, and then microwave twice." He laughed, a real laugh, and shook his head. Ashley came over then. Her fairy-light smile turned down to a human level. "We're not mad," she said carefully, "about the key, or about the picture. My mother is, but I can handle her." This last line had bravery in it, and it softened me toward her just enough. "The trust is a lot," she added, and the word had more than one meaning. "Thank you. I am not trying to buy a place in your life," I said. "I am trying to buy my granddaughter a little safety that no one else can spend. And that has nothing to do with you unless you want it to." Ashley blinked, processing, and then nodded slowly. "I do," she said, and I believed her, which surprised me enough to make my eyes sting. Frank approached then with his stance that says a story is about to happen to you. He opened his mouth and closed it when he saw my face and the envelope, and the red purse, and Jason's attention. Something in the geometry of that moment made him do the math differently. "Happy birthday to the star," he said to Lily instead, loud enough that other people could hear him. It felt like a rehearsal for a different kind of future. On my way to the car, a neighbor I recognized from the time I took Lily to the playground, and she'd lent us a Band-Aid, touched my arm. "You're deviled eggs," she said, Saved me when I thought I was going to faint before the cake. We laughed, small and bright. I brought the tray home, I said. I'll bring you some next time. I liked the way next time sounded in my mouth. That night, in my kitchen, I washed the red purse with a cloth and warm water, careful around the seam. I emptied it into the tin. The old Goodwill sticker now sticky with my pocket lint, the slips I'd written, the Target card receipt. I put Lily's castle cake napkin, folded small, in there too, because stickiness is part of the story. I wrote another line for the tin. Returned key. By the lake. Lily made a wish. Before bed, my phone buzzed. A message from a number I had never saved but knew. Ashley. I posted a picture of the lake but not of you. I hope that's okay. Also, this is weird to text, but thank you for not making today. About an old fight. I stared at the screen and thought of my mother's buttons, round and unhelpful, and how sometimes you put them in a tin until you know. I wrote back. Today was about Lily. It will always be. Then I added, I am free on Thursdays. If you ever need someone to take her to the library. She liked the message. I put the phone face down and turned off the kitchen light. For a second, I turned it back on, because I like the sound it makes when it warms. Tomorrow would be a Tuesday. There would be soup. There would be an extra place at the table, whether Jason filled it or not. A few days later, I was in line at Jenny's for 2 scoops, lemon and brambleberry crisp, because one should always be sharp, and one should be sweet. When a woman I didn't know touched my elbow. I follow Ashley, she said, not unkindly. You're her, the grandma? She struggled for the word, and I smiled to give it to her. I am Margaret, I said. The name felt like a full glass of water. She nodded as if I had handed her something useful. I liked that you weren't in the picture, she said, and then flushed. I liked that. There was space. It felt gentle. She was young, and she looked tired in the way young mothers do. Sometimes all the noise makes me feel like I'm a bad mom if I don't hold the confetti just right. She laughed and looked at the ceiling as if the right words were up there. Anyway, it helped. I thanked her and took my ice cream to the bench by the window. And for a minute, I let myself feel proud instead of reasonable. A small, necessary pride, not one that takes from anyone else. The red purse sat beside me. It seemed steady, and I slipped my hand inside to touch the tin. I thought of the metronome of the bow against the windshield, keeping time with my heart on a day that had asked too much of me. I thought of all the moments since when the rhythm had shifted. Not all injustices are corrected with a speech. Some are corrected with a quiet return of a key, a line on a calendar, a recipe you keep making because people will always be hungry. Some are corrected by letting other people take their pictures while you walk down to the water with a child and ask her to throw a wish as far as she can. Some are deepened. The zinnias came up bold and joyful, as if they had never doubted the plan. On a Thursday, Ashley texted, "Can you take Lily to story time at the library?" It would mean a lot to her. The wording was careful and kind. I said yes, because yes is a beautiful word when it comes from a place you chose. At story time, Lily sang the ABCs with 7 other children and looked over her shoulder at me every time they got to L, a letter she suspects I invented just for her. We checked out a book about a girl who makes a map of her neighborhood. On the way home, she asked if I would put my house on a map for her. I will, I said, and I will draw the path from yours to mine with a red pen. Jason came on a Tuesday with a bag of groceries under his arm and a new word in his mouth: boundaries. He said it like he had learned it in another language and was proud of the pronunciation. He did the dishes without my asking. He moved the stool in the corner because he thought it might look better by the bookshelf, and I laughed because he was wrong and he moved it back, grinning. I do not know what the car is doing now. I imagine Frank polishing it gently in his garage, like a man who found a version of his life he recognizes and is afraid to scratch it. I wish him well. I do not need to visit the place where it sits, to know it is not where history returns. When I think of the moment I decided to pick up the key and place it on the table by the lake, I do not feel dramatic or brave. I feel accurate. Like the red seam, straight and humble and strong, I had finally stitched my life to itself in a way that would not tear when pulled. The bow on the windshield had tried to keep time with my heart, but it had never really been mine. The tin is, the soup is. The hand I held when we threw rocks was. The night before school started again, Lily and I sat at my kitchen table with a map I'd photocopied at the library, and crayons spread out like a rainbow had lost its way and fell there. She circled my house with red. She drew a line, straight as only a child can make it, from her front door to my back porch. She dictated the legend. Red means love. Blue means the park. Yellow means ice cream. What's black? I asked, teasing. She held the crayon and thought. Black means we have to be brave, she said seriously, and then smiled. But we can do it. We can do it. We can say enough without shouting. We can return a card to a store and not return ourselves to the place where someone believes we are paid for our love. We can show up with soup and say we are unavailable next Tuesday. We can teach a 5-year-old to throw her wishes into water and plant zinnias that bloom like small defiant suns. We can stitch seams and make maps and let pictures form without us when the story they tell isn't ours to tell. On the first cool morning of September, I stood on my porch with a mug of coffee and watched 2 squirrels lay in supplies, like tiny, anxious shopkeepers. Somewhere down the block, a child protested a jacket. A car door closed. A dog barked, and then stopped, because the thing it needed was given. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. A picture from Jason. No caption. Just Lily on the floor in a fort made from blankets, her eyes fierce with happiness. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was the edge of my red purse. Not the star, not the point. Present. I went inside and pulled the tin from its place on the shelf. I did not add a slip of paper. Not because nothing had happened, but because sometimes the record is the living itself. The soup, the throw of a stone, the quiet click of a key returning to the person it belongs to. I closed the tin and set it back. It did not rattle. The house breathed with me. The day waited. And I, Margaret, 66, a woman who once said yes until she forgot where the word ended, picked up my calendar and wrote in red ink, Thursday, story time plus map. Then, under it, I wrote in a neat line that made me smile to see it so clear. Enough. With love. The week that followed felt, in a way I hadn't expected, ordinary. Not the small, dull ordinary that can leave you hollow, but the ordinary that has been rearranged so its furniture fits you. Jason came more often. He stopped by without a photo attached to his arrival. He helped me carry in a bag of groceries and set the eggs gently in my blue Pyrex because he knows, after all these years, where the good bowls live. Once, when he was leaving, he paused on the porch with his hand on the door frame like a man who had remembered to breathe, and he said, "Mom, I don't want to keep screwing this up." I told him then what I had been telling him in 100 smaller ways. You can't fix every bruise with a big thing. Sometimes you fix with a stitch. Sometimes you fix with soup. Ashley and I found our way to a truce that was quieter than the scenes people expect in movies. The first time she stepped into my kitchen unannounced after that Mother's Day, she brought store-bought cookies and a look that asked if I would take her measure. I set the kettle on and reached for a plate that had been in our family for longer than her Instagram account had been open. She watched me fold the napkin with both hands, and then, because perhaps we are both more human than we sometimes perform, she set the cookies down and sat. "It's been a lot," she said, not as accusation, but as explanation. She looked tired in the way I used to be tired after night shifts at Riverside. Alert, but thin where the light hits. I probably should have handled the post differently. She stopped, measured something unnamed. She was not the only person learning new ways of speaking. "I saw your mother's message," I said, because it felt kinder to speak of the olive branch I'd been handed than the slap I'd swallowed. And I appreciate it. I poured tea, handed her a cup that steamed between us like a small white flag, and when she took it, our fingers brushed. It felt awkwardly pleasant, like a song you'd forgotten the chorus to, and then remembered halfway through. We found a language that wasn't about who had been right and who had been wrong. It was about how to move a grandmother's name from the back of a caption into the middle of a sentence. She started asking for recipes, the deviled eggs she had once relegated to not on the Pinterest board. She asked if I would teach her the trick for making the yolks light and creamy, and she listened like she had always wanted to learn something other than how to angle a camera. I put her hand over mine and guided her through the filling, and when she laughed at how much salt it actually took, I felt something loosen between us that had been wound too tight for too long. Frank did not become a different man overnight. He still liked his stories to have applause built into them, but he called to ask if I would join him at the neighborhood luncheon for retired folks at St. Michael's, and he left me a bouquet of lilies, delicate, white, honest, on my doorstep one afternoon with a note that read, "For the woman who always made better soup than me." It was the sort of thing a man with a new car could buy without cost, perhaps, but it felt like more than that. It meant he had noticed where his gratitude had been loudly performed but quietly misplaced. The key and the garage opener remained in my top drawer, folded into their envelope like a promise that had been returned so it would not be spent. Jason asked about them once, awkwardly. "Do you want them back?" And I said, "Not unless you can promise me that if I knock, you'll open the door because you want to, not because it's convenient." He laughed then and promised, and the promise was a beginning. More people began to notice, and they noticed not because I made them, but because I made a different choice. The woman at Jenny's who'd touched my elbow and said, "It helped," sent me a message months later with a photo of her daughter in a fort. A neighbor left me a zucchini at the back gate with a note. "Your zinnias are the town's cheers." Little things piled into a life, and the pile grew steadier. The tin, my robin's egg blue tin, sat now on a shelf near the window where the light found it at noon and made the dent in the lid gleam like an old coin. Inside were the slips: bank at 9, attorney at 2, boundaries. Saturday, 4 hours, returned. Enough, with love. Sometimes I would open it in the evening and run my thumb across the paper, feeling the indent where I had pressed too hard and thinking how much pressure I'd once let other people put on me. There were strains. Not all the good changes were immediate like a well-timed pot roast. There were texts from Ashley that still carried the tone of someone negotiating a role. There were evenings when I sat on my porch and listened to the distant sound of someone posting, the ping like a dinner bell no one had invited me to. Once, her post about a neighborhood fundraiser left my name out in a caption where the list of helpers scrolled like a list of ingredients, and for a second, the old ache flared. But what was different now was the way I met that flare. I picked up my tin, I remembered the stitches, I made a bowl of soup and wrote in my calendar, Tuesday, soup night. That was a remedy that required no public performance. There were also gifts. At Lily's first day of kindergarten, I walked her to the bus and she turned, small backpack bouncing, and pointed directly at me in a way that made every person on the sidewalk misread our family story. "There she is," she announced, thrilled, and people looked at me the way you look at someone who has shown up. When Ash's group chat, Team Lily, strangely named like a startup, finally included me, I was added with a heart emoji and a message that made me smile. "So glad you're in our chaos." Small, careful words like that repaired more than a new dress ever could. One evening in late October, when the air had that particular Ohio bite that makes you want to tuck your chin into your scarf, Jason and Ashley came to my house together. They had made the drive across town without a camera between them, and when I opened my front door, they stood there like two people who had rehearsed apologies and found the script too small. They stepped over the threshold like they were ready to stand in my life without a stage. "We were talking," Jason began, and his voice had the kind of steady that comes from someone who has sat with the truth for a while. "And we realized we've been trying to prove something to people who don't know us. We forgot the people who do." He looked at Ashley and then at me, and something in his face made me think of a boy in a school hallway who had finally found the courage to trade a rumor for a conversation. Ashley reached for my hand first, the same hand that had held the cereal box crown decades before. "Mom," she said, not the vlogging voice but the human one. "I'm sorry. I want to learn from you how to be better at this. Not for the feed, for real." She said real like it was a key. She meant it. We ate in my kitchen, no photographer, no staging. We talked about what it was like to grow up under the pressure of being seen in a certain way, and about what gets lost when we put people in frames instead of rooms. We talked about Lily's ridiculous love of wearing one sock and the other missing, and Jason told a story about the time he hid my shoes as a teenager because he thought it would be funny and then couldn't find them when he needed them himself. We laughed until the kettle hissed and long into the night. When they left, the porch light flicked like a small applause, and I felt properly like someone was finally telling me I was present in the story. The red purse became a quiet hero in all of this. It was silly in some ways, a thrift find with a ripped seam, but it held the thing I wanted to carry differently. I mended it carefully, knotting the last stitch myself so the thread would not come loose in a hurry. I used it for errands, a farmer's market tomato, a folded list, a small bouquet of zinnias. Sometimes I would put slips from the tin inside it and walk to Goodale Park, where the dogs splashed and people walked their own complicated lives. The purse, now mended, looked stitched with intention. It reminded me that things that survive are not flawless. They are repaired with care, and kept because they work. Winter came with slow days and more time for soup. I took to making an extra quart and driving it over to Frank and Elaine one Wednesday. Because gratitude, I decided, can be a pot you share, even if the table it was set on used to be arranged differently. Frank accepted the soup with a grin, and that manly manner of someone admitting an earlier omission without saying the word. We sat at his kitchen table and warmed our hands on the bowls and talked about nothing, and then about everything. Work, golf, the strange, small ways the universe keeps a person honest. He told me a story about his father I had never heard, and I told him one about mine. It felt, in its own small way, like the two of us were stitching something tender on a napkin. Spring arrived with a compost of its own. Regrets, seeds, and a plan. The zinnias exploded along my walkway, absurd and proud. Lily learned to ride her bike without training wheels in my driveway, wobbling like a small comet, and then steady. She skidded into my arms one afternoon, knees scratched and triumphant, and the tin fell open in my thoughts like a laugh. She took the red pen out of my table drawer and drew a new line on a map she'd begun. From her house, through Easton Town Center where the ducks live, to my back porch where the plate of deviled eggs always waits. There was a Sunday when the neighborhood sat together for a potluck at the green near the library. Jason showed up and, without a spark of ceremony, handed me a small envelope. Inside was a print of a grainy photo. Me in a cereal box crown, holding a spatula like a scepter. He had made an enlargement and framed it in a thrift store frame he said matched my house. "You look like a queen," he told me, embarrassed by his own sentiment. I put it on my mantle and, for the first time in years, I felt like my photograph was not an afterthought in someone else's gallery. People began to tell me their stories in the checkout line and on the bench at Goodale. A young mother with a toddler asked me how I had learned to say no without shouting. A high school teacher said he'd used my boundaries note as an example in a class about adulting. These small confidences felt like a kind of currency I had never noticed until I realized how poor I had once been in self-respect. Eventually, there was a day that could have been awkward, and instead was gentle. Frank offered to take me for a short spin in the Bentley. He was proud of the car the way people are proud of a job well done, and he wanted me to see how it hummed. I agreed, because I do not carry grudges like treasures. We drove past Alum Creek, the engine purring under us like a content cat, and he turned the radio low so we could hear the county line crunch under the tires. He asked me about zinnias and my mother's biscuits and what I wanted to do on my next Thursday. He asked the questions people ask when they are trying to belong somewhere new. When we got back, he watched me step out of the car and then said quietly, "Margaret, Margs, thank you." It was the first time he had said my full name with tenderness. I handed him some of the soup I'd brought, and he accepted it with both hands. It felt like a truce that had been earned. Months stitched themselves into a soft pattern. Not everything changed. Social media still had its flashes and announcements. Sometimes I would see a photo where I was cropped out, and the polite ache would arrive like a guest who stayed too long. But the ache no longer dictated my life. I had my Tuesdays with soup. I had my tin. I had zinnias and a grandson. No, a granddaughter, with a penchant for one sock and a talent for cartwheels. I had friends at the library who knew my favorite chair. I had a son who called without expecting performance. I had a daughter-in-law who asked how to make deviled eggs and meant it. The red purse sat on the entry table, half jewelry box, half map, sometimes holding a receipt and sometimes a ribbon Lily had found in the yard. Once, on a particularly quiet evening, I took it down and set it on my lap. I ran my thumb over the seam I had sewn. The thread was red, visible, deliberate. I thought of all the years I'd let my edges blur, and all the years I'd been proud to be someone's silent infrastructure. I thought about people who are built like bridges, and how they often forget they deserve banks at both ends. I carried the purse the day I walked Lily to her first day of piano lessons, and the day I brought a pie to the block party. And once, when Jason needed a hand rearranging furniture for a baby shower, I lent him an extra table and my patience, but only after he'd said he'd meet me for soup on Tuesday. He did. He always did. When the following Mother's Day came around, there was no Bentley in our driveway and no staged video. There was a small bouquet of tulips from Jason, a handwritten card from Ashley that said simply, "Thank you for teaching me to make things that hold." Lily drew a crown for me out of crayons and taped it to my kitchen door. We ate pie on the porch at my own pace, the sun warm and unbothered. I put the red purse on the table like a centerpiece, and someone, maybe Jason, made a joke about its provenance, and we laughed because the joke had been reclaimed. I do not tell you this to claim some perfect ending. People continue to be messy and lovely and contradictory. There were days I missed the wild pride of being indispensable in the old way. There were moments when Ashley posted a glossy photo and I felt for a second like a backdrop. Then I would remember the fort at dusk and Lily's face when she bowed at the recital and the tin waiting on my shelf, and the ache would settle into something else, an honest bruise that had taught me how to move. If the red purse is anything, it is a small portable history. It remembers the Goodwill sticker, but it also remembers the stitches. It holds receipts and cards, and the tiny list of things I am not willing to do anymore. It is a metaphor because it must be. I am not a purse in the literal sense, but I am a holder of people, of habits, of weather. I am also, finally, allowed to be a container for my own needs. On a cool September morning, as the leaves were just starting to decide their colors, I stood on my porch with a mug of coffee and watched Lily zip past on her bicycle, a bright ribbon of laughter. I pulled the tin down for the last time that week and ran my thumb along the dent until it shone. I set it back on the shelf. The house exhaled. I wrote in my calendar under Thursday, story time plus map. Under that, in red ink, the same neat line I had practiced until it fit like a new glove. Enough, with love. If anything in my story resonates with you, the quiet courage, the stitch-by-stitch mending, the small ways a woman can reclaim herself, then tell me. Tell me about a time you sewed a seam that held, or when you finally put a note in your own tin. Leave a comment below so we can learn from each other. If you felt seen by my story, press like. It helps other women find this place. And if you want to hear more about the ordinary courage of everyday lives, about zinnias and soup, about forts and repairs, please subscribe. I keep an extra bowl of soup on Tuesdays, and an open page in my calendar for the people who are learning how to say no without shutting the world out. The red purse still sits by my door. It is scarred and useful, and sometimes it carries a ribbon Lily has declared essential. Sometimes it carries a list of things I will not do. Mostly, it carries my hand's work and a map that leads right back to the porch where I brew the tea and wait. Remember, you do not need to be perfect to be worthy of being seen. You just need to be steady enough to sew your own seams and brave enough to keep them mended